Welcome to Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. In the next hour, we'll be examining some of the most pressing issues in the markets and the economy at a time of enormous societal, economic, and cultural transformation. Among our guests, Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky.
We've seen initial recovery, our business back to 2019 levels without spending a dollar on advertising.
Also with us, the CEO of Carnival, Arnold Donald.
Eventually, I think the cruise industry will be as robust as ever and be back on a road forward once society again adapts to COVID-19.
Skybridge Capital founder Anthony Scaramucci will be here as we survey the current political landscape.
Let's say I landed from Mars. I said, okay, give me a pitch on these two parties. I'm going to join one of them. What is the message from the Republican Party today?
And we'll hear from Byron Allen, founder and CEO of the Allen Media Group, Accenture CEO Julie Sweet, and the head of consumer banking at Wells Fargo, Mary Mack. All that and a lot more during our Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. Welcome to the All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. I'm Andy Serwer, editor-in-chief here, along with the rest of the Yahoo Finance team. Over the next few minutes, we're going to do a jam-packed virtual forum to discuss the biggest stories of the day. We have a special interview with Brian Allen, Surgeon General of the United States, COVID-19, and a panel on food insecurity, how over 50 million Americans are facing this problem during the pandemic. But first, let's go to Anthony Scaramucci, founder of Skybridge Capital and the former communications director, to talk about the resilient stock market and the Trump administration. Anthony, welcome. Great to see you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm trying to upgrade my room raider status, Andy, so I hope you don't mind the setting that we're in. I've been getting dished on room raider, so I'm hoping this will give me a little lift. But the stock market is a very narrow market. It's basically 15 stocks. Today, obviously, the tech stocks were slightly weaker. There was a small rotation. But these rotations, Andy, they never last. And so what's powering the market right now, 15 stocks. Some are trading in infinite PE. Some are trading at 150 times earnings. And, you know, I'm long enough in the tooth now, 32 years in the industry, to know that this ends in tears. No one's going to be able to predict when it ends. But when a pin goes into this stuff, there'll be 50, 60% declines. You can't have 150 times earnings and not see some kind of diminution in value as things multiple contract.
Yeah, I mean, why do you think that's going to happen, though, Anthony? I mean, is it because the economy's not in great shape or COVID's worse than people think? Why do you suspect the market's going to go down from here?
No, I'm not saying it's going to go down. It's going to rotate. Take a look at where the S&P was in January and the complexity of the S&P. Value has shifted into the FANG stocks plus Microsoft. The S&P now is up for the year, but value has come out of 485 stocks in the S&P and gravitated to 15. And so what I predict will happen is as the economy starts to improve and people feel more comfortable in earnings at Carnival and earnings at other companies in the Dow Jones Industrials and in the S&P 500, it'll rotate. And if you're at 150 multiple, even if you have really good fundamentals, you can't expect those names to stay there. And I'll bring you back to March of 2000, when the Nasdaq was at 5,000, and everybody was red hot for internet stocks. Yahoo was a hot ticket back then, as you will recall. And yet by March of 2000, a pin went into the Nasdaq, and we saw a 50% loss in value. Microsoft has traded down, in my memory, at least 3 times since its IPO. Somebody told me today it was 6 times. I have to do the research on it. But my point is, you can't have stocks rally to this extent at those valuations without expecting some loss. So no, I like the overall market. There's a water wall of liquidity in the market, and the economy will improve once we get to a vaccine. But I'm just worried about that sliver of stocks that's propelling the market right now.
Yeah. What about the hedge fund business, Anthony? You know a little bit about that. You're in it. They had a great month in April, but questions about it going forward here, hurting about outflows and the like.
Yeah, well, listen, we had a difficult March, as you know. I talked about it on Yahoo. We've had a 14-week period of time where we've had about a 9% recovery. Our best month since the COVID-19 crisis was June, where we were up 3.7%. So the hedge fund industry is having a small renaissance right now because of the rotation that's going on in the overall market. And if you look at what happened in March, companies like Bridgewater, companies like Skybridge had very difficult months. Canyon had a difficult month. So a result of which you're now seeing a residual reversal. And so, yes, money is flowing out of the hedge funds. The passive active debate has been won by the passive investment community. It's 12 years of them winning that debate. And so we could then write an obituary of the hedge funds. But you and I both know, being on Wall Street for as long as we are on Wall Street, that we both think that we're in the investment business, but a lot of times we're in the fashion industry where things come in and out of favor. And if you see some type of normalization in the market, you will see a return to active investing versus passive. So I'm always cautioning people, leave yourself in a balanced portfolio, have at least 5 to 7% exposure to hedge funds, companies like Skybridge, Point72, Bridgewater, et cetera.
Yeah. I want to jump into some politics here quickly. We saw that former Ohio Governor John Kasich said he's going to speak at the Democratic convention, maybe some Republicans jumping ship here. What does this mean as we head towards November, Anthony?
Well, I think many Republicans feel this is now battle for the democracy. So this is the biggest schism in the Republican Party since the Jerry Ford, Ronald Reagan schism in 1976. And so a good portion of Republicans, myself included, have broken away from the president and would choose Joe Biden over President Trump. Many Republicans feel that Joe Biden is actually more of a Republican than President Trump if you really study his record and you study Trumpism. And so I think it's going to be a very difficult election for the president. I referenced that to you in January before the COVID-19 crisis brewed up. We were in Davos, Switzerland together. You asked me my opinion. I thought then that the president was going to lose the election. That was not the consensus by those global elites that you and I were trafficking in at that time. But it does seem like now that that's a likely outcome. And I think you've got a number of things going on right now in 2020, very different from 2016. And that's basically the schism in the party. And John Kasich, Governor Kasich, represents that. And I'm very excited that he's going to be speaking at the DNC.
Who should Joe Biden pick as his running mate, Anthony? Kamala Harris, Susan Rice, Val Demings. There's a lot of people out there. And
Well,
would you?
I like the other. I like the other Rice. I like Condoleezza Rice actually.
All right. Who do you think he's going to pick? And would you serve in the administration?
So would I serve in the administration? Well, only if he promised me that I would serve for 12 days and not 11. I'd have to get sort of a job guarantee, you know, the way you guys get your long-term media contract. So I would serve, but I got to at least serve for 12 days, not 11. But in this following order is what I think is going to happen. It's Kamala Harris, possibly Susan Rice, and then I think Val Demings would be third. Not that she's not incredibly talented and very competent, but I just think that she is not as well vetted on the national stage as the other two represent. So, and her time will come, in my opinion. I think she's an incredibly talented person.
Anthony, you mentioned to me earlier that this is the 3rd-year anniversary of you having the one and only press conference as White House communications director today.
Yes, I lasted one Scaramucci, which is now 11 days, sort of the Kanye West of press secretaries or communications directors. But look, I'm out on the beach today. This is the take your dad to play day as opposed to taking a kid to work. So I've been doing my work from here. I hope you guys don't mind. but it's a beautiful setting out here in Southampton. And here, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn the camera.
Yeah, well, life is a beach for you. I want to ask you about a tweet that you put out there today. It had to do with the president being concerned about getting COVID and getting tested a lot. And you told a story about a part of your anatomy.
Yeah, well, I was experiencing a dry throat on Air Force One, and the president's a very famous germaphobe, and so he's pressing buttons in the cabin there. Ronnie shows up, and the president said, "Hey, something's wrong with Anthony. Go fix him." Ronnie looked in my mouth and insisted on giving me a penicillin shot in my buttocks. So when you think about humanity, when you think about your mortality, there I was on Air Force One with my trousers down, taking a penicillin shot. And so I was just, riffing a little bit this morning. I thought that was funny. People say that the president's being tested 2 or 3 times. I absolutely believe that. Listen, my issues with the president are not personal. I always got along with him in those settings. He's a garrulous guy. He can be very charming, but man, is he a germaphobe. Do not lick your fingers and go to touch something on his desk, like to turn pages. He flips out about stuff like that. Ask Smith Mulvaney.
Anthony, I think we're going to have to leave it at that, in part because I don't think we can go anywhere from here. Anthony Scaramucci, thank you very much. Enjoy your summer.
Great to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Skybridge. Thank you.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra, Brian Sozzi speaks with Carnival Corporation CEO Arnold Donald on the future for cruise lines. Stay with us.
We've been broadcasting from our homes here at Yahoo Finance as we do our part to try to have social distancing and also try to flatten that curve.
If you speak with any expert in economics, in finance, they will all agree that we don't know what to expect.
It's time for us to start to reopen our economy, to start to reopen America, and we protect ourselves by protecting others around us.
Nothing will stop us from doing what we love to do.
It's your portfolio. It's your retirement. It's your money. Isn't it time you trade up? With Yahoo Finance Premium, you can trade up to tools that let you go beyond the fundamentals, to exclusive access to proprietary data and pattern recognition. With industry-leading insights and advanced charting, you can make the best moves for your money. Get started with your free trial today.
My fiance's name is Melissa, and she needs a miracle.
Based on the true life story of Jeremy Camp.
Can we do something special for the most special person in my life tonight? Can we pray for her? Whatever this is, I'm with you. I'm in.
Never lose faith.
If one person's life is changed by what I go through, it will all be worth it.
I still believe.
Rent or own the latest movies with Verizon Fios On Demand.
My mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any catastrophe that was on the air, she would say, always look for the helpers. Because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
Cruise ship companies have virtually no revenue coming in. Basically, right now, they are in full-on survival mode.
It's very much unknown what will happen with airlines in the future, what the demand will really be.
And the rebound in the travel industry is being threatened right now as we see coronavirus cases spiking across the country.
Carnival, Royal Caribbean, and Norwegian have been hit hard, not surprisingly, by the coronavirus.
Back to Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. I'm Brian Sozzi. Joining me now is Carnival Corp CEO Arnold Donald. Arnold, always good to speak with you. Thanks for taking some time today. Listen, you and I talked back in May, and the quote for me that you left me with, Carnival, you are fighting for the survival of your company. What's that fight look like since we last talked?
Well, Brian, first of all, good to be with you. I'm a little envious from the previous interview. They're on the beach, so
Tough life.
That's getting close to the water, so we like that. But anyway, it's good to be with you. Yeah, we at that time we were fighting for survival, and obviously the whole travel and tourism industry has been devastated by the reactions to COVID-19 globally. Having said that, we've done the things we needed to do. I'm so proud of our people. I'm so grateful to our guests who have reached out with just a heart, pouring their hearts out to our people in support, for our crew, for our shoreside people, and for the brands they love. And all of our travel agent partners who are struggling through all this with us. But we've been successful. We've been able to raise capital to give us a nice runway, even if we have an extended pause with no revenue. We've done a number of things in terms of getting our crew home. We've had to repatriate. We've repatriated almost 80,000 crew members with 1,000 or 2 left over the past few months. And that was a daunting task because borders were closed, evolving restrictions and regulations as it happened. No flights available. Even when we had charters, sometimes we had crew on a charter and at the last minute, the country would close its border or whatever, and we'd have to reevaluate the whole thing. But we're able to repatriate nearly 80,000 crew and get them home safely. And we're marching now through the pause to get geared up, and we're excited. There's an opportunity. It looks like we'll be able to cruise starting in Germany in August. So that's a positive sign. It's a little bitty step. It's our AIDA brand, maybe 3 ships, cruises to nowhere, out to the sea for 3 or 4 days, and then back to a drivable port in Germany. And then so we're crossing the bridges and dotting the I's and crossing the T's and doing what we need to do.
I definitely want to touch upon Europe and then return to sailing there. But walk us through some of the steps you have taken to save the company. A lot of big numbers that have been, no pun intended, floating around. What exactly have you done?
Well, again, first of all, always our highest responsibility, and therefore our top priorities always are compliance, environmental protection, and the health, safety, and well-being of our guests, of our crew, and of the people and the places we touch. And those are always our top responsibilities. So on that front, we had to get guests home, over 260,000 of them. We had to get our crew, as I mentioned previously, we had to get them home. And now we have to maintain our ships with minimum manning, but have to do that in a manner where, of course, we're honoring our obligations and responsibilities with regards to compliance and environmental protection. So minimum manning of ships. We've had to get rid of some assets. Those ships are expensive to maintain. A number of ships were less efficient. In a few years, they probably would have been out of service anyway, but right now there's no opportunity for them to generate revenue. So we've gotten rid of, or plan to get rid of, over 13 ships so far, which we announced on the last earnings call. And so we've had to do that, and we had to raise capital. So we've done multiple raises: senior secured debt, convertibles, common equity, second lien debt, commercial paper, and continue to work on delaying, deferring maturities, especially on new builds, delaying new build ships. It's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone on. And it's amazing how people have been able to do most of this virtually, including the raising of nearly $12 billion in capital. And so it's just an amazing thing to see everybody come together and pull together and do what we needed to do.
Arnold, part of sailing down the road to recovery is part of our theme for this conference, is the return to sailing. Have you had any serious discussions with the CDC? They came out recently and they extended their no sail order from July 24th to September 30th. So when does the U.S. start up again? And you mentioned Germany. What about Italy and some of those other European territories?
Well, as you mentioned, the CDC did issue a no-sail order. The industry had previously volunteered through pretty much the same time period to continue to pause with operations here in the U.S. We all stand together, not just our cruise industry, but all of us stand together to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. So to predict when it would be appropriate, you have to look at COVID-19 and society at large. So when society is comfortable socially gathering, and in doing so, you're not seeing surges and hospitalizations or whatever related to COVID-19. When you're at that point, you can begin to think about true social gathering, and then you can begin to think about cruise. When is that going to happen in the U.S.? I wish I had that crystal ball. Could it happen soon? Sure. 3 months ago, 2.5 months ago, who would have thought Germany would be looking at opening borders and starting cruising? That wouldn't have been the case 2 months ago. But yet they are. Why? Because they're at a point right now where they have very low community spread, so they have mitigation of spread in Germany, lower incidences. They have plenty of hospital capacity and so on, and are not seeing massive surges in hospitalizations or anything. And they feel comfortable that there are protocols that they have in place in society in general that allow them to return to some sort of normal. And so we'll see how that plays out. It's just the beginning. For us, our priority is public health. So we're going to operate in the interest of public health. In Germany, where the incident is low, we got a number of protocols that we worked out with the German government to ensure that we are as safe, if not safer, than similar type of social activities shoreside. We would do the same here in the U.S. Italy has been looking at it, as has Spain. Those conversations have been going strong too. As you know, Brian, the virus moved from east to west. And so some of those countries had surges before the U.S. did. So we'll see how it all plays out. But there's so much yet to learn, still and understand about COVID-19. And that's why, if I can add one more comment, that's why we're having, in conjunction with the World Travel and Tourism Council, a COVID Science Summit, and you can go to it, covidsciencesummit.com, July 28th, made up of world-renowned panelists, medical experts, and scientists from around the world. We're going to talk about the science of COVID, everything from transmission, epidemiology, detection, prevention, therapies, vaccines, and how to live with it today. And so everyone's invited. It's no charge. It's a virtual. We've got thousands of people already signed up, and we invite everyone. And if you want to sign up, this, once again, covidsciencesummit.com, Carnival Corporation and World Travel and Tourism Council together.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. Carnival Corp CEO Arnold Donald, always good to speak with you, and good luck down the path on the road to recovery. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Brian.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, we speak with U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams. Stay with us.
It's your portfolio. It's your retirement. It's your money. Isn't it time you trade up? With Yahoo Finance Premium, you can trade up to tools that let you go beyond the fundamentals, to exclusive access to proprietary data and pattern recognition. With industry-leading insights and advanced charting, you can make the best moves for your money. Get started with your free trial today.
Verizon Fios brings you more thrilling action, more magical moments, and more ways to watch with a free Movies Anywhere account. Visit Verizon.com/Movies Anywhere. Connect your accounts, and then enjoy your favorite purchased movies your way, wherever and whenever you want. So don't wait. Your free Movies Anywhere account brings all your movies together in one place. Your movies together at last with Movies Anywhere. Sign up today.
These are more than just the sounds of a safe place to go after school. These are the sounds of interest being ignited and of mentors making an impact. At Boys and Girls Clubs, we don't do just one thing. We do whatever it takes to meet the needs of every kid who comes through those doors. Because whatever it takes is what it takes to build great futures. Great futures start here.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, Road to Recovery. I'm Angela Kimlani, healthcare reporter. I've been following the outbreak of this coronavirus and the global pandemic that has upended economies across the world. Joining me now is the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams.
Really glad to be here with you.
I know that it's a tough time out there with so much going on with the mask debate, especially as we're seeing so many cases rise across the U.S. and continuing to do so. Could you tell us about what the logic is and what the thinking is at the federal level about not requiring a mask mandate?
Well, I appreciate you asking that because there is so much focus on whether or not we should force people to do something, and I think not enough focus on the need to educate people about why they should do it. Strictly from a public health, motivational, and behavior change perspective, it's important to know that we don't have much luck when it comes to trying to force people to do something if we don't couple that with the why. We know that if you force people to do it, they'll do it when you're watching, but then when you aren't watching, they'll stop doing it. We also know that shame doesn't work, and that's true for opioids. That's true for STDs. That's true for HIV testing. What I'm focused on as Surgeon General is helping people understand a couple of things. Number one, COVID-19 has really humbled us in terms of its asymptomatic spread. Really quickly, what that means is that previous diseases like COVID-19, other coronaviruses, really weren't spread by people who didn't have symptoms. You knew if you were sick, and if you were sick, then you were one of those people who was more likely to spread the disease. But up to 50% in many cases of people who are spreading COVID are spreading it before they have symptoms and without ever even knowing they have it. And that's why our recommendations changed to tell people to wear masks or face coverings. The other important thing I want people to know is that masks actually don't inhibit your freedom. They don't inhibit your choice. They enable freedom and enable more choices, because we know that if we can get 90% of people to wear face coverings and get people to practice at least 6 feet of social distancing from their neighbors and practice good hand hygiene, that we can reopen and then we can stay open and we can get back to schools, to worship, to college football in the fall, and to the other things that people want to do. You'll have more choices if you wear a face covering.
There has been some debate and comparisons about, seatbelt enforcement and other things like that. Would you say that those are fair comparisons, and that even if at the state level there should be some level of enforcement?
Well, I'm not opposed to mandates at the state and the local level. We actually support local control and state control. Here's the concern when you talk about enforcement from a federal level, and this is a very practical concern. This isn't subjective. If the difference between a mandate and a guideline is enforcement. And from a federal perspective, we can send in federal troops, and we see that's not working very well in places like Oregon right now, and that there are also concerns about enforcement when you look at what's happened in the African American community and people being killed for very minor offenses. And we also could take away federal funding, which I think is a very tough thing to put on the table at a time when we're fighting a global pandemic. And then there's civil penalties. Again, all of these things work best and become less necessary if implemented at the local level and coupled with education. And so, again, not against a mandate, but really against doing things without making sure people understand why they're doing them and working with the local communities to make sure everyone understands that we all benefit when people wear face coverings.
Dr. Adams, one of the things that you're really focused on is diversity, and especially looking at how the virus has been disproportionately impacting certain communities. What has been done whether at your office level or generally with the coronavirus task force with addressing these? Because we've been hearing about them, but there hasn't really been any action.
Well, we should be shocked by the statistics. Native American, Alaska Native, and Blacks, 5 times the rate of hospitalizations. Hispanics, 4 times the rate of hospitalizations. And we know that a disproportionate number of the 140,000 people who've died of COVID-19 in this country have been people of color. That should shock us, but it shouldn't surprise us. And what I mean there is we've known for over a century that people of color are disproportionately impacted by an array of diseases, from cancer to heart disease to diabetes and to substance use disorder. And really what COVID-19 has done is shown us those health disparities that have existed in communities of color for all of my life and have impacted me and my own family personally. So you ask what the task force is doing. We're trying to, number one, improve data collection. And the CDC now collects data according to race and ethnicity. That wasn't happening before and still isn't happening with a number of other diseases because it involves a level of coordination that goes beyond the federal government. Again, it may start at the local coroner. It may start at the local hospital where a person is admitted and you need a busy nurse to write something by hand and to fax it in. We're looking at improving those processes to make it easier for people to do the right things. We're doing more research. The National Institute on Minority Health, which is a part of NIH, is doing research regarding how we can make testing more available in communities and making sure we've got urgent research done to ensure the remedies that are available, like remdesivir, like steroids, like convalescent plasma, work as well and are equally available. And we're also working, and this is critically important for your viewers to understand, we're working with communities to make sure they are participating in vaccine trials because we want everyone to understand that vaccines are safe and effective, and we want people to feel confident that they're safe and effective in all communities so that we don't actually worsen disparities with a vaccine, which could happen if the people who are least affected get the vaccine and the people who are most affected from COVID-19 won't get the vaccine or aren't equally helped by it.
My thanks to Dr. Jerome Adams, U.S. Surgeon General.
Straight ahead on Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, Sabeel Marcellus speaks with Allen Media Group founder and CEO Byron Allen on how the entertainment industry is being transformed. That's next.
This is Autoblog. For over 15 years, our team has covered the auto industry. But here on the Autoblog show, each episode features our favorite videos of the hottest new cars from all over the world. We're drivers, off-roaders, journalists, tech geeks, gamers, filmmakers, and adventurers. This is Autoblog.
I'm Sonic. I'm here to protect my friends. Pew, 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 pew.
Supersonic.
Gotta lay low. Let me show you how it's done.
Time to go. I'm coming for you.
That was an illegal left, by the way. Here comes the boom. How are you not dead? I have no idea.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. I'm Sabeel Marcellus. Our next guest is a stand-up comedian turned media mogul. Byron Allen is the founder and CEO of the Allen Media Group, which owns nearly a dozen cable networks, including the Weather Channel, about a dozen local television stations, and produces more than 60 syndicated TV shows and thousands of hours of content. Byron, let's first talk about what it takes to pull off a multi-billion-dollar deal in the media industry. Your $8.5 billion all-cash bid for TV station owner Tegna was made public in March. Are you any closer to acquiring those 62 television stations?
You know, we have, first of all, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate that. We have a great deal of interest in Big Four network affiliates. Big Four network affiliates, that's a terrific business. Last year in 2019, 92 of the top 100 television shows came off of Big Four network affiliates, ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, because we have NFL football and college football and the Oscars and the Emmys, the Grammys, and just phenomenal content. This is also important in this pandemic world because we have local news, and local news is very important. And on the television stations that we own, some of them are doing 50, 60, 70 shares in terms of the audience watching our local news to get information on COVID-19. And we're more essential than ever today because of what's going on with this pandemic. So this is a phenomenal business. We are very much all in on Big Four network affiliates, and we would love to own Tegna and other Big Four network affiliate companies out there.
Well, you said that you plan to invest $10 billion over the next 3 years to acquire ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox television stations. But given the current media climate that we're in and the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on advertising, are local television stations still profitable?
Yes, they're very profitable, and we have very good margins. We did take a bit of a dip in the second quarter, as everybody, as we had shelter in place with local advertising, but it will come back. You have to have advertising just to let people know you're open for business. So we expect, and we're already seeing, positive signs in the third quarter, and we expect the fourth quarter to also continue to head up. We know long run, it's a marathon, not a sprint. We're going to be fine. Everybody's going to need local news, weather, and sports. That's just essential to who we are. And not only that, we have our Big Four network affiliates, but we also have a streaming service called Local Now. And Local Now is an app that's free, and it provides local news, weather, and sports, and it's on your mobile devices, so it's with you wherever you go. This is information that's just essential, and it's very much essential in a pandemic world.
Let's talk about access to venture capital, because that's notoriously difficult for Black Americans. Yet you managed to raise $300 million to acquire the Weather Channel 2 years ago. How'd you pull that off?
Great question. I made it a point to really get to know the capital markets and let the capital markets get to know me. And I went out and I spent quite a few years, the first 15 to 20 years of my business. I started my company from my dining room table in '93, so 27 years ago. And unfortunately, for the first 15 to 20 years, I did not have access to bank capital. I had to use factors, people who would take my receivables from Pepsi and Johnson & Johnson and McDonald's and Procter & Gamble, and I couldn't wait 120 days or 90 days to be paid. They would pay me weekly. But the factors were charging me as much as 26, 27%. And I knew I wasn't going to survive paying that kind of an interest rate. So I made it a point to get to know folks who had capital. And I met a gentleman who has a firm who manages a little over $100 billion. I called him up, and I knew managing $100 billion, it's not easy to deploy that amount of capital and get it back with a return. I let him know I had an opportunity to buy the Weather Channel at a very attractive price, and he gave me the commitment in one day. So he lent me $310 million out of his $100 billion fund. He gave me 5 years to pay it back. And I decided not to pay it back in 5 years. I decided to refinance and pay it back in 5 months. And in doing so, I had to pay a prepayment penalty, what's known as make-whole. I gave him close to a $30 million penalty for paying him so quickly. And that got out throughout Wall Street pretty quickly. And a number of bankers showed up at my door, and I knew they would. And I purposely did that as a way of saying that if you put capital with me, not only will you get it back, you'll get it back with a great return. And that's why I said, here's your $310 million back, plus a nearly $30 million thank you 5 months later. And Wall Street rolled out the red carpet. And shortly after that, we were able to raise a little over $1 billion to buy more television stations. And now we have circled about $10 billion to buy even more media assets, not just TV stations.
That's definitely impressive. Let's talk about the coverage of protests following the death of George Floyd. In your opinion, does mainstream media have a blind spot when it comes to covering issues of race and racism?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a big blind spot. And I think that's because at the end of the day, 99.9% of the media is going through the lens of white owners and white managers. I wrote an op-ed called Black America Speaks, America Should Listen, What We Need to Do to Never Come Back Here Again. And I offered it to a number of newspapers to run it as an op-ed, and it was consistently rejected. And I knew that they would reject it, and that's why I went and bought 16 pages, because it was 2 pages to print it out, 16 pages in 8 different newspapers around the country. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and on and on. And I really wanted to talk to America in a way so that we can go to the next step and really take what we've learned from Martin Luther King, who taught us that there are 2 Americas. One America has access to education and opportunity and jobs and mentorship and capital that's not predatory, and the other America does not. And 2 Americas will not survive. Well, Dr. Martin Luther King shared these thoughts, these brilliant thoughts with us over half a century ago, and now we're watching it unfold. And what's happening is that we now have to become one America. We have to make sure that every American is positioned to succeed, that every American has access to an education that's free. Every American has access to health care, and you don't have to worry about health care because that's your God-given right. Every American has opportunity to success, whether it's jobs or business or capital to buy a business or start a business. We have to position each and every American to succeed to its fullest, because we have to compete as one nation, as one tribe, the American tribe, because we have a lot of emerging nations around the world who are doing a much better job of educating their citizens and getting their citizens engaged. So
And Byron,
that's why I wrote it.
This brings me to this. What is your take on President Trump's criticism of the media and the coverage of the protests following the death of George Floyd?
Well, listen, I think President Trump is completely wrong. The media is, President Trump, what he's not understanding is that he's nothing more than temporary hired help. He works for the American people. He answers to us. We don't answer to him. The media is there to keep the bosses informed, the American people. We are the boss. We run it. And so to criticize the media doesn't have an incentive not to tell the truth and to be 110% transparent. So he's wrong. And it's really, you're in a bad place when someone's trying to control the narrative and tell you what you should, what they want you to know. Thank God we have the media, or else I think we might all be drinking Lysol right now. and we don't need to be drinking Lysol. And
No, definitely not. But we're going to have to leave it there. Byron Allen, founder and CEO of the Allen Media Group. It was great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, our very own Jen Rogers is joined by Accenture CEO Julie Sweet on diversity in business and in the boardroom. Stay with us.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. My guest is Julie Sweet, Accenture CEO. Accenture is one of the top strategy and consulting companies in the world. It has offices and operations in more than 200 cities in 51 countries. So Julie, as I just said, you are working around the world. You work with CEOs everywhere. US CEOs right now are confronting the pandemic, an economic crisis, a long overdue racial reckoning. Are they more or less optimistic than their counterparts in the rest of the world? What are you hearing?
Jen, well, first of all, thanks for having me today. I think it's interesting. I actually don't think they're more or less optimistic because actually across the world, there's a recognition that what the US is facing, either their countries going to face or is already facing. And that's true on both fronts with the pandemic and the spikes we're seeing today with respect to the coronavirus. But it's also true with respect to the need to fight racism. And one of the things that when we as a company went out and made some very clear goals with respect to fighting racism and creating more economic opportunity, my global management team was very clear that they wanted these goals to be ones that they did in their own country's context, because racism, well, we have a very unique and terrible history here in the US and so much to do. It is an issue that is faced in many countries around the world.
And I do want to dive more into many of the issues and letters that you've actually written yourself dealing with many of these issues. But before we do, I want to get at this idea that something different is going on in the US. I mean, President Trump today said that the coronavirus pandemic is probably going to get worse before it gets better. We had a poll out this summer from the European Council on Foreign Relations that showed that in almost every country surveyed, there's actually an increasingly negative perception of the US. So, it seems like there is something different happening in this country. And for our audience, I'm really curious about what the impact, if you see that, could be on cross-border business. Or do you really not see that there is a difference in what companies are dealing with here?
Well, I think let's look at it at two levels. So first of all, I mean, there's no doubt about it that we do not have the crisis, the health crisis yet under control, and we're seeing that, right? But the conversations I've had as recently as earlier this week with some of our the clients of our European CEOs is that they're concerned that, for example, as they go into the holiday season, that they may see the very same spikes. And so while certainly there's, differences in how things have been handled and whether things are, we're under control now, and we're certainly seeing with the cases, I guess what I would say is most of our CEO clients are actually very cautious about what, for example, is going to be the story in September after the European holidays. And the other thing that, what I'm seeing as a universal theme is that as important as it is today, and it's critical that we address the health crisis, and let's face it, every business is now a health business. What we're also seeing broadly across the world are CEOs moving from how do we get a handle on managing the health crisis to what are the strategic decisions we now need to make, because this is going to be a crisis no matter where you are in the world. It is not going to end until there's a vaccine or a better treatment. And so how do I actually now pivot to growth? How do I build my business differently? And I will tell you, there's no more optimism and a different view of the criticality of the strategic decision making that now faces you, whether you're in Japan or Europe, China, or the US. It is a common theme, and that's just the reality of what businesses are facing today as they look at the length of this crisis.
Let's get back to talking about some of the race issues that we're dealing with specifically in this country. And you work with 3/4 of the Fortune Global 500. And I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of those countries wrote a letter or put out statements following the murder of George Floyd. What are they doing now? What are you seeing companies do that is going to hold them accountable in the next few years?
It's a great question, and it's actually a question that's being very much focused on, and that's why I'm very optimistic that there is a moment of change. So I'm a member of the Business Roundtable, and I sit on the board there, and the Business Roundtable has formed a committee, and that's about 200 CEOs across the US. And not only is this committee focused on what we can do in our communities, but there's a very clear focus on what we need to do at our companies. And so things like making sure that people are setting goals, things like data collection, and what actually has to be different in terms of the environment at work with measurable progress. Those are the things that are being discussed. Best practices are being shared. We've been transparent with our numbers since 2015. We've set internal goals since 2015, and we've seen progress. It's not been fast enough, but we know that that works. And I'm so encouraged by the level of dialogue and commitment to real change and treating this like a business priority, with setting priorities, measuring progress, and holding leaders accountable inside their own companies, and in addition to that, to doing more in our communities.
And I've read your letter that's on LinkedIn and some of the transparency that you talk about in there as well. It's worth a read if people haven't seen it. But as we have this conversation, so much of it now is about systemic racism. And the system that we live in is a capitalist one. Are there conversations in the business world about what the role is for the business community in fighting racism? Do you think that they have a role and that they're up to it?
Absolutely. There are those conversations, and what is very different today is that companies are saying we have a role in fighting racism, including advocating for the kinds of reform that are being debated around, reform in police departments and in the criminal justice system, and that we need to have a voice at the table advocating for these changes. It's a big shift, and it's something that at the Business Roundtable we're really proud of saying we know we have a role, and we are going to play that role and take that responsibility.
Thank you so much. It's always great to get a chance to talk with you, Accenture CEO Julie Sweet.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen.
Thanks. Before we go to break, here is famed ballerina Misty Copeland on what she's doing to give back and raise awareness during the pandemic.
It's been difficult for people who spend their days, spend their lives invested in this art form, and we're very physical people. I mean, we spend hours at a time partnering one another in very intimate environments. So to be just yanked out of that and not have that personal human connection, I think is a bit shocking, emotionally, psychologically. But, logically, just like so many people in the world, dancers have been furloughed. There's no way of making money right now when the theaters are shut down. Part of my journey during COVID has really been to try and lend my platform and my voice to be able to help dancers who are without jobs, who are struggling to keep food on the table, a roof over their head, through an initiative that I helped to start called Swans for Relief, to get funds out to different dancers from companies all over the world. So I think in the long run that the dance world's going to learn from this, because we've never really been pushed to have a virtual presence. And this is an opportunity for us to step back and take a look at all of these things that are very old and very traditional, but that we need to kind of reassess and revamp. And I think that our digital presence, this is the time that we need to be really venturing into those spaces and learning how to do it and how to change all of these restrictions that in the end are only hurting us. For me, it's the first time as in my position that I feel like I'm truly being heard. And to me, that's a step. This has been my life's work as a dancer, speaking about racism in the world and in ballet, speaking about the lack of diversity, and to have my company, to have the ballet world listening and to have different panels and to be able to speak about this in a way that I have before. But again, for the first time, people are really seeing it. And I think that that's what's different about this time, is that I feel like we have true allies in people from other communities and races that we've not had before.
Next up on Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, how COVID-19 has changed our workplaces forever. We'll speak with Adobe CIO Cynthia Stoddard and Infosys President Ravi Kumar.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra Road to Recovery. I'm Akiko Fujita. The pandemic and the stay-at-home measures that were implemented early on have accelerated the digital transformation of companies all around the world. And we've got two guests who have a pretty good pulse on the implications this is likely to have, not just on the tech sector, but the broader workforce. We've got Cynthia Stoddard, who is the Chief Information Officer at Adobe, also Ravi Kumar, who is President of Infosys, and welcome to you both. Cynthia, I want to start by talking about how the pandemic has prompted you to rethink how you operate things over at Adobe, because you're a global company, you've got offices all around the world. How have you had to pivot as a result of not just local restrictions, but international border closures?
So that's a great question. So yes, we have had to pivot. We had to pivot to work from home. One of the things I think I'd like to start in that talking about is being prepared. At Adobe, we take being prepared for different activities very seriously because we want our customers to have the highest level of service, as well as our employees having a great experience. And I have past experience with SARS when I was CIO at a shipping company. And at that time in 2004, we actually struggled to enable a group of remote workers. So last year during the California fires, I said, hey, what if our headquarters, was impacted? What if team members that we, required to come to the office for support couldn't get there? How would we run and support the business? So we created a preparedness plan, and we didn't have to use it, which was great. But this year I had a trip to India, and coming back, it felt again like SARS. So I got with my team, we put the preparedness plan, we dusted it off, and we gave them some scenarios. I gave them some scenarios and said, what if this office had to shut down because of what's going on in China, and different scenarios. And it ended up, we found different components, different elements that needed to be changed a little bit. And then a couple of weeks later, over a weekend, we made a decision to click our entire workforce over to work from home. And some elements did change. I mean, we had a mentality that, if anything happened in the US, we could automatically click over and, have India cover us, right? But in this case, India was in the same situation. So we had to, pivot and look at how we backed up different roles and responsibilities differently.
Ravi, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Adobe, among a number of tech companies that have pivoted to work from home, and we've already heard from the likes of Facebook and Twitter who say this is a permanent shift that is happening right now. So the question then is, what's the fundamental shift that's likely to come from this in the labor market? And you've talked about this new equilibrium that could emerge on the other end. What does that look like?
Kiko, thank you for having me on this program. Infosys, as you're aware, is a global tech and digital consulting firm. So we have 250,000 employees across the globe. So we quickly pivoted to a hybrid world, as I call it, because as I spoke about in one of my posts, we're going to go through a 4-phase equilibrium. Some of the countries are in the first phase. There is a second phase, which is before the virus really gets protected by a vaccine, where you go back and forth on demand. And then there is a third phase where you get to an equilibrium where the hybrid working is going to be a new normal, as they call it. And many CIOs I've spoken to, many tech companies I've spoken to have told me that maybe 50% of the workforce is never going to come back to work. And I would say there is a fourth phase, which is preparing for an unknown unknown. Remember, the virus is actually a known unknown. We are going to prepare for an unknown unknown, and therefore create a virtualization on demand, a resilience on demand, an infrastructure which will allow us to stretch the boundaries and make it very seamless. Coming to the labor market, I would say there has been never a time before where enterprises are going to change on all 3 dimensions: work, workplace, and workforce. Work is going to become very modular. Workplaces are going to become very hybrid, and workforces are going to become people plus gig, because work is very modular. You could take it across to different parts of the world. You could split it into small components. And with the advent of AI, I think workplaces are also going to become people plus machines plus gig. So that's the broad context in which the labor market is going to change.
Ravi, let me pick up at that point. Cynthia, there's inevitably going to be questions about the security risks that arise coming from all of this. You not only have staff in, different offices now, but working from home as well, where they don't have the same type of secure infrastructure. Are there heightened vulnerabilities that could come from this push to work from home?
So on the security front, I would say that, security is always evolving, and you have to keep on top of your defensive game in order to, make sure that you have everything in place. So, in our case, we use Adobe sanctioned devices with security. I'll give you an example. We've developed what we call a desktop as a service. And, when people want to use our software, employees or interns, we do a scan. So their equipment has to be clean. So whenever anything connects to our network, we have to make sure that the devices are clean and sanctioned. So yes, I would agree with you that there are increased vulnerabilities if you don't have the right security and defensive programs in place.
Ravi, let's talk about where all of this digitization is likely to lead to. The fear of automation, the job losses that could come with it. That was something that we had talked about even before the pandemic, but now you've got millions of people who are unemployed, worried that their skills just simply don't match sort of the future of where the labor force is going. How do you develop an infrastructure that leads to meaningful reskilling and sort of creates what you've called this chain of learning?
Okay, that's a great question. In fact, in the United States, 40 million people have lost jobs. 70% of the people who've lost jobs do not have an undergrad degree. They either have a high school or an associate degree. I would believe this is an inflection point where we're going to move from degrees to skills. As the pandemic, just right before the pandemic, the change was very gradual, and you're going to now find this to be sudden. There was a shift to future jobs. There was a World Economic Forum report which spoke about 125 million jobs of the future being created, 75 million jobs of the past being taken away. So this is our opportunity. We have a choice to either reset back to the past or reset into the future. And if we decide to reset into the future, we need a radical reskilling, or a chain of learning, as you called it. The radical reskilling you need starts from evaluation of skills, to finding the pathways, to online training, to hand-holding and apprenticeship. And the reason why I call this a chain needed for radical reskilling is because some of our industries have got decimated, some of our work streams have got decimated. So the 40 million people who need jobs will have to pivot to jobs of the future, and will have to pivot to different industries which are proof by recession. So if we really want to do that, you need to bring a consortium of sorts with these complementary players to come together to deal with reskilling. Unlike in the past recessions, reskilling was actually owned by individuals. Reskilling has to be owned by consortiums. I have to put one last point out here. You know, machines and AI being a part of workplaces was always happening for the last few years. This pandemic is going to actually accelerate the embrace of machines and AI software into workplaces. So you are going to see a shift from people to people plus machines. And that shift is going to move the human endeavor to problem finding versus problem solving, which was always the trait needed in workplaces.
Yeah, no question about many trends that have been accelerated. Ravi Kumar, president of Infosys, and Cynthia Stoddard, chief information officer of Adobe. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Straight ahead, on Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, Shauna Smith speaks with one of the most powerful women in finance, Wells Fargo's Mary Mack, on recovery for small business and a lot more. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra Road to Recovery. I'm Shauna Smith. I want to bring in our next guest. We have Mary Mack, Senior Executive Vice President and CEO of Consumer and Small Business Banking at Wells Fargo. And Mary, when we talk about the coronavirus impact that it's having on the economy, the big banks, including Wells Fargo, giving us a glimpse of that this past week with their earnings reports. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this because banks have this unrivaled visibility into the health of consumers and of businesses. So give us a sense of what you're seeing and what you're hearing from your consumers and your small business clients.
Well, thanks, Sean. I'm delighted to be here. So thank you for having me. And yeah, we're hearing from a lot of customers who need help, who need access to funds through the payroll protection program, who need for their small businesses, who need help with forbearance, and we're working with all of them. We're also hearing from customers whose local economies have been opening back up, and they want access to cash, and they're using their debit cards more. So it's really a mix based on where you are in the country.
So when you take all of that into account, what is your economic forecast at this time? Because the timing of the recovery, it's very hard to gauge at this point as we see the number of cases continuing to rise across the country. So when do you expect we'll see a recovery? And then what are you expecting just in terms of spending trends for the second half of the year?
So it is a little hard to predict. And we have recently, for instance, taken down a bit our expectations for the third quarter, given some of the outbreaks we're seeing in different parts of the country. So it'll be a better quarter, but probably not as much recovery as we might have expected in maybe even just a few weeks ago. Customers are getting out a little bit more. They're starting to use their credit cards a bit more, their debit cards a lot more, but maybe not as many times. The spend, for instance, on debit is actually up a bit from a year ago, but they're not going as many places to spend. So a little bit, some recovery in areas that were hardest hit, like entertainment or other things like that, but still down from last year.
Mary, I want to shift the conversation just a little bit and get your perspective on, you're in a very unique position, or a unique position, I should say, as one of the few senior executives still with Wells Fargo today that saw the bank through what had been a very challenging time. So I'm curious just to get your thoughts about, when it comes to the consumer and to the small business banking division, just what you have done and what you think still needs to be done to win back that consumer trust.
So we have done a lot over the last 4 years, but as you recognize, we have more to do. We've made a lot of changes in the way we serve customers in our branches. We have changed our programs that our branch employees operate off of in terms of their expectations, their incentives, et cetera. And that has translated through to the customer experience. We're measuring customer experience much more robustly than we have in the past. And we're taking that feedback in on a regular basis and making changes based on what our customers tell us. So again, we have more work to do, but we're delighted with the progress we're making. And we're bringing new talent to the company that's helping us accelerate our transformation.
Yeah, Mary, going off of that, winning back consumer trust, and then also just the importance of fostering a positive company culture. And I'm curious just about the recent announcement that we got from Wells Fargo, planning to cut around $10 billion in expenses this year. And then, of course, the thought process is that when you announce cost cuts, it could potentially involve layoffs. So when you talk about the importance of culture, I guess, how do you do this while ensuring the culture within the bank stays strong?
Well, I think a big part of it, Shauna, honestly, is to be really transparent with our employees. That was a big part of Charlie's message and talking about it as we're developing plans. And we'll involve employees and customer feedback in the programs that we establish and the changes that we make. So we have had a process over the last 4 years to follow our customers and what our customers want from us and need from us. And that sort of transparency and visibility has served us well and will continue to.
And Mary, I want to get to a very important initiative that Wells Fargo is doing, talking about giving back. Wells has helped provide food to people and families in need in the past, and taking into account the economic hardship that we have seen that so many Americans are enduring because of this coronavirus pandemic. I understand Wells Fargo has an upcoming announcement on food security later this week. So what can you tell us about Wells Fargo's initiative?
So we have committed and been very vocal about our commitment to housing instability, and very closely related is food insecurity. And what we wanted to do was use one of our most important resources, which are our branch locations that are in states across the country. And we will go into 20 or more of the hardest hit communities and use our real estate to set up food banks, drive up food banks. We'll distribute over 50 million meals to customers and community members that are in need in those various communities. We're really excited about it. It's a way, as you mentioned, we have done it over the holidays in the past and used our branches for food collection sites that we could distribute. In this case, we'll actually distribute meals in our parking lots for folks that are in need in those communities. And we'll announce that later this week. And we're really excited about the ability to lean into that very related issue to housing insecurity.
Yeah, very important, especially at this time. Mary Mack, Senior Executive Vice President and CEO of Consumer and Small Business Banking at Wells Fargo. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Shauna.
Next up on Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra, our editor-in-chief, Andy Serwer, is joined by Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky. We'll hear about the new rebounds in bookings, its IPO, and a lot more. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome to our guest, Brian Chesky, who is the co-founder and CEO of Airbnb. Brian, nice to see you.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Nice to see you.
So I guess let's just take a big swing question first. What was it like when coronavirus started to unfold and you started realizing the impact on the company and the business?
You know, we started the company over a decade ago, and I thought that was the craziest experience of my professional life. And for many years, I said, I'll probably never experience something as crazy as starting Airbnb. And in March, I think we experienced that. We spent 12 years building our business, and within 6 weeks, lost about 80% of it. And when a business drops that quickly, not only there's this feeling of losing much of what you've created, but things start breaking, right? Like suddenly guests wanted more than $1 billion of refunds, and you can't really plan for pandemic related refunds because people are counting on that money to pay their rent or pay their mortgage. And so it just kind of felt like you're, like on a ship and you just get sideswiped, and it was incredibly intense. It felt like everything was breaking at once.
So where do things stand right now? And maybe even more important, how do you even begin to manage things going forward?
Yeah, well, the thing is really good to point out is that Airbnb is in 190 or so countries.
Yeah.
And so we kind of get to see the experiment of different countries' approaches play out, because we're also very large, say, in Italy. And Italy also had a huge surge around the same time United States did. And now Italy has, it seems like, it's a little different place. And what we're seeing in the United States is that the United States had a definite initial recovery, and it's now, I think, we're going to expect it to slow down. But one of the things we're seeing is a totally different way that people are traveling. Before COVID, people traveled a lot for business. They got on airplanes, they crossed borders, and they went to big cities. And in those cities, they stayed in these central hotel districts. And now a whole bunch of things are happening. People are saying they do want to get out of the house, regardless what country they're in. They do have this need to get out of their house, but they aren't right now super comfortable getting on airplanes. They want to get on cars, and they want to travel not more than 300 miles away or 200 miles, a tank of gas. They're going for leisure. They're going to not big cities. They're going rural. They want to get out stores. They want to discover the outdoor communities. And most of all, they're looking to stay in homes. And so that has been a surprise to us, maybe the extent that we've seen demand come back. What I mean by that is the last few weeks, we've seen volumes of business that are actually the same size volume as a year ago. When it was April, or even beginning of May, I could have never, ever imagined that it would have been that resilient. And this may be pent-up demand. I think you're seeing a little bit of it. I think one of the things you're seeing is people are sheltering in place in other homes. So they're basically saying work from home is now work from any home, and maybe I want to get a different home on an Airbnb. So they're getting longer term stays.
Do you think that COVID has changed the competitive landscape, giving either them or you more of an advantage?
Travel is changed forever. The world of travel as we knew it in January is never coming back. It's never coming back. I feel very confident about that. What I'm not totally sure about is what is going to come back. And that's just guessing the future. But it's pretty easy to know once hundreds of millions of people experience Zoom and they realize they don't need to travel for work, people will travel for work again, just not everyone. Some people are going to realize now they can do this thing. A whole bunch of people who thought they had to get on an airplane and go to a city and stay in a central district realizes, well, there's 400 national parks in the United States, and I live near one, and maybe I should go see a natural park. And suddenly, you can't undo all this knowledge.
Yeah, I want to ask you about social and racial justice, the social protests. First of all, have you guys done enough at Airbnb? I mean, you made some donations, but do you need to have more diversity at your company?
I'm not sure if you were to ask 100 CEOs, have you done enough on racial diversity? If anyone would feel comfortable saying yes, because I don't know who has done enough. Airbnb has not done enough. We need to do more. I am proud of the work we've done, but I kind of think we're all living through this history where we're all reliving the last year, 5 years, 10 years, and ask, what if I did more sooner? Every single one of us is now saying that. And I think there's a lesson there that we're probably 5 years from now going to say that about this moment now. I think internally we need to do more. We had a little bit of a setback with the layoffs because we disproportionately laid off non-technical people, non-engineers. And so we laid off fewer engineers than non-engineers. Engineers are there are not many Black engineers, and so our diversity was hit by disproportionately laying off non-engineers. And so we have a lot more ground to make.
Brian Chesky, CEO of Airbnb, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next on Yahoo Finance's All Market Summit Extra, a special discussion on tackling one of the more urgent issues during this recession, featuring former Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, along with Feeding America CEO Claire Babineaux-Fontenot. Stay with us. This Road to Recovery segment is sponsored by Wells Fargo.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Julie Hyman. This is what food insecurity in America looks like. It's one of the more enduring images of the coronavirus pandemic and subsequent recession. Miles-long lines of cars at food banks across the country. Joining us now is Claire Babineau-Fontenot, the CEO of Feeding America, which is one of the largest nationwide nonprofits feeding the hungry, and Tom Vilsack, the CEO of the Dairy Export Council, also former Agriculture Secretary. Thank you both for joining us. Claire, I want to start with you to sort of set the scene, if you will, because food insecurity, or people who don't know where their next meal is coming from or have trouble paying for food, this was already a problem going into this pandemic, and it has only made things worse. What do the numbers look like right now?
Yeah, so thank you so much for asking that question, and thank you for inviting Feeding America to this really important conversation. So before the pandemic, there were approximately 37 million people in this country who did not have consistent, predictable access to a mix of food upon which you can base a healthy lifestyle. So food insecurity in the country has been a big challenge for a very long time. Unfortunately, we're seeing those numbers really rise. And so far, based upon the estimates that we have, it appears that we're actually going to see food insecurity rates as a result of this pandemic go even higher than they were in the last Great Depression, which was at that time unprecedented. So we're anticipating that the rate of food insecurity will go up to about 54 million people, and that right at 20 million of people who are facing food insecurity in this country will be kids.
Governor Vilsack, what are some of the problems that have arisen on that front that existed before but maybe have gotten worse during this pandemic?
Well, it's a cascading effect of a pandemic. First and foremost, it obviously caused a disruption in the normal supply chain. Normally, food would go to food service organizations, McDonald's, restaurants, schools, institutional purchasers of food. When those shut down, when kids were let out of school, the question was, why didn't we just simply convert from delivering it to McDonald's to delivering it to a Feeding America site or a local food bank? Well, the reality is the system wasn't set up to do that particularly well. It was from a regional standpoint or a local disaster standpoint, if a hurricane hit or a flood or something of that sort, but this was a national situation. So what we had was that initial disruption. Then when food was delivered, oftentimes the food banks found themselves unable to store adequately or to refrigerate properly the food that was being donated. So that caused an issue. So then there was the pictures of people dumping food and destroying food, farmers dumping milk. People got concerned about that. Then there was a run on this on the retail stores, which made it difficult for Feeding America, which normally gets a lot of its donated food from retail stores, not in a position to donate because there wasn't anything left.
So what are the communities or the segments of the population that are hardest hit by that? And are there particular challenges then with getting food to them in particular?
Yes. So let's start with children. Before this pandemic, about 23 million children in the United States relied upon free or reduced meals. For many of those children, that meal that they received at school was the only consistent way that they received the nourishment that they needed for their growing bodies. So when the schools closed, with that came a significant challenge for kids around the country. In addition to that, we have certain communities that have been hidden in plain sight with these significant, really significant challenges. And among those communities would be communities of color. So we know that there have been access challenges for communities of color. We know that, as one example, African Americans make up about 12% of the US population, but make up about 22% of the people who face food insecurity prior to the pandemic. The Latinx community makes up about 17% of the US population, but makes up more like 24% of people who are food insecure before the pandemic. If I had to name four groups, if you will, it would be children, it would definitely be communities of color, it would be rural communities, and it would be seniors.
Governor Vilsack, So how do we address this from a policy perspective, not just to sort of plug this temporary crisis that we have, hopefully temporary crisis that we have, but also just to improve food security in the U.S. in a more sustained and long-term basis?
Well, there's, I think, a couple of things that need to be done. First and foremost, the SNAP benefit, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, people often refer to it as food stamps. That benefit, the calculation of that benefit needs to be changed and increased. It needs to certainly be increased now in the face of the pandemic, but frankly, it has been underfunding families for far too long, and it needs to be adjusted. Secondly, I really do think that Congress should figure out a way to provide resources to food banks, to Feeding America, so that the infrastructure can be more resilient, the capacity for refrigeration, cold storage, et cetera, be expanded so that in the event we have another pandemic, we're in a position to be able to store a number of these perishable items that in the past have been destroyed. I think it's also necessary to continue giving the USDA the flexibility to use the Commodity Credit Corporation to purchase surplus products.
I will just add one data point. As great as our network of food banks is, I mean, we have provided, just since this pandemic started, we provided almost 2 billion meals between March and June. I mean, that's absolutely extraordinary. But the gap is another 8 billion. And we simply do not have the infrastructure or the wherewithal to do it. So these policy considerations are absolutely essential. And for every meal we can provide at our best inside of the charitable food system, that SNAP program can provide 9.
Thank you so much to you both, Clara Badman, the CEO of Feeding America, and Tom Vilsack, the CEO of the Dairy Export Council and former Agriculture Secretary. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And thanks to all of you, our audience, for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed these wide-ranging conversations. And that wraps up Yahoo Finance's All Markets Summit Extra Road to Recovery. Mark down on your calendar for our all-day virtual summit on Monday, October 26th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you then.